The slap landed before anyone could even react. A grown woman's palm cracked across the face of a 6-year-old girl, so hard the sound echoed through the cabin like a gunshot. Little Lily didn't even have time to flinch. 1 second she was standing in the aisle holding her stuffed rabbit, and the next she was crumpled against her mother's arm, sobbing, her small cheek already burned red. The woman who did it didn't even look down. She straightened her blazer, tossed her hair, and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "Get out now, you filthy animal." Nobody moved. Nobody said a word. But Lily, sweet, quiet, 6-year-old Lily, looked up through her tears and whispered 4 words that would change everything on that plane. If this story moves you, please subscribe to our channel and drop a comment telling us what city you're watching from. I want to see just how far this story travels. Now let's begin. Rachel Thompson had learned a long time ago that the world did not always make room for people who looked like her. She had learned it young the way most black women learned it. Not from a textbook, not from a lecture, but from the slow, grinding accumulation of moments that nobody ever officially acknowledged. The glances that lasted a half-second too long. The way certain rooms went quiet when she walked in. The polite smiles that never quite reached the eyes. She had grown up absorbing those lessons with her shoulders back and her chin level, because her mother had raised her to meet the world with dignity, even when the world didn't extend the same courtesy. And she had passed that lesson down to Lily. Lily, who was 6 years old and already knew how to carry herself like she belonged wherever she stood. Lily, who had her father's deep brown eyes and her mother's stubborn spine. Lily, who loved strawberry lemonade and picture books about horses and a stuffed rabbit. She had named Captain because, as she explained with complete seriousness, rabbits deserved important titles. They were high in the air somewhere between Boston and San Francisco, when the world, as it sometimes did, decided to remind Rachel just how much work was still left to be done. It had started the way most terrible things started. Quietly, unremarkably, with nothing more than a woman walking down the narrow aisle of a private aircraft. The jet belonged to a charter service that Rachel's husband, Michael, used when he traveled for business. It was not a small plane, but it was not enormous either. The cabin had 2 sections separated by a short corridor. First class, then a rear lounge connected by a passage just wide enough for 2 people to squeeze past each other if both were willing to make room. Rachel and Lily were seated toward the back, which meant they were in the path of anyone moving between the 2 sections. Rachel had noticed the woman the moment she boarded. It would have been hard not to. She had arrived at the gate escorted by a man who appeared to be some kind of personal assistant, young, nervous, walking fast to keep pace. The woman herself walked slowly the way people walked when they had never once been told to hurry up. She was in her 30s, dressed in a pale cream blazer over a silk blouse, with the kind of effortless polish that took either a very good stylist or an enormous amount of money, usually both. Her name, Rachel would learn later, was Vanessa Caldwell. At the time, she was just a stranger with cold eyes and a rhinestone phone case. Vanessa had settled herself into a wide seat near the front without acknowledging a single soul on the plane. She ordered sparkling water before the flight attendant had even finished her safety introduction. She didn't say please. She didn't look up. The attendant, a young woman named Brooke, who had been working private charters and had long since mastered the art of invisibility, poured the water and disappeared without comment. Rachel had watched all of this from the corner of her eye the way mothers watch things they don't fully trust, but don't yet have reason to address. She had settled Lily in the window seat with Captain the Rabbit and a juice box, and for the opening stretch of the flight, everything was perfectly fine. Lily fell asleep. Rachel sat with her phone in her lap reading a long email from Michael that she hadn't had a chance to get through before boarding. He was already in San Francisco for a series of meetings, She missed him more than she usually let herself admit. Michael Thompson was not a man who made a lot of noise about who he was or what he had. But when he was present, you felt it. The steadiness of him. The way the air in a room seemed to settle when he walked through the door. She was halfway through his email when Lily woke up. "Mommy," Lily whispered, tugging at Rachel's sleeve with small, urgent fingers. "I need the bathroom." "Okay, baby." Rachel started to stand, but Lily was already unbuckling herself, already sliding out of the seat with the independent determination of a child who had recently decided she was old enough to do things on her own. Rachel reached out instinctively. "I'll come with you. I can go by myself," Lily said, which was something she had said a lot lately. "I know you can," Rachel said, which was what she always said back. And she stood anyway because that was what mothers did. Lily was 3 steps ahead of her, Captain dangling from one hand, making her way down the narrow passage between the seats. She was small for her age, compact and sure-footed, and she navigated the aisle with the focused gravity of a child on a mission. That was when Vanessa Caldwell stood up. She emerged from her seat without warning, the way people emerged from seats when they had no habit of looking around themselves before they moved. She was heading to the rear of the cabin, the lounge, the bar, whatever it was she wanted, and she stepped directly into the aisle just as Lily was passing. Lily stopped. She looked up. Vanessa looked down. For a moment, it was just that. A child and a woman standing in the passage of a private jet. Nothing more than a logistical problem, the kind that resolved itself dozens of times a day when 2 people occupied the same narrow space. But Vanessa didn't step aside. She didn't wait. She looked at Lily the way some people looked at things they found mildly objectionable. A smudge on a window, a chip in a plate. And she said with a tone so flat it was almost impressive, "Move." Lily blinked. She was 6. She was holding her rabbit. She had just woken up from a nap, and she needed the bathroom, and she was not in this particular moment processing the social dynamics of class and contempt at the speed Vanessa apparently expected. She didn't move immediately, not because she was defiant, because she was 6. "I said move," Vanessa repeated, and the word dropped like a stone. Vanessa, the assistant seated nearby, glanced up with the expression of a man who had been in this situation before and had learned there was nothing he could do about it. She ignored him. Lily, finally registering the urgency in the woman's voice, started to step to the side, but she was in a narrow aisle, and Captain was dangling out from her hand, and she was half a second too slow. And Vanessa Caldwell, who had never in her entire life been asked to wait for anything, made a sound of pure contempt, a short, sharp exhale. And then she reached out and shoved Lily's shoulder. Not a gentle nudge, a shove hard enough to make Lily stumble sideways into the seat beside her, hard enough that Lily's shoulder hit the armrest with a dull thud. Rachel was already moving. "Hey!" The word came out before she could shape it into anything more composed. "Don't touch my daughter." Vanessa turned and looked at Rachel with an expression that was somehow worse than anger. It was the expression of a person who found the very idea of being addressed by Rachel faintly absurd. "Your daughter," she said, "was blocking the aisle." "She's 6 years old," Rachel said. Her voice was steady. She was working very hard to keep it steady. "You don't shove a 6-year-old. I barely touched her. You shoved her into the armrest." Rachel was beside Lily now, one hand on her daughter's shoulder, checking automatically, instinctively, the way every mother checked for hurt. Lily was not crying yet, but her eyes were wide, and she was holding Captain against her chest with both arms. She needs to learn to move when adults are speaking to her, Vanessa said, and she began to step around them both. Excuse me, Rachel said sharply. We are not finished. Vanessa paused. She turned back slowly the way someone turned back when they had decided to do the turning on their own terms. And she looked at Rachel, and then she looked at Lily, and something in her expression shifted, became cooler, more deliberate. I don't know who you are, she said very quietly, very precisely, but you are not someone I need to explain myself to. The cabin had gone still. Two businessmen near the front had stopped their conversation mid-sentence. A woman in a cream hat had put down her magazine. Brooke, the flight attendant, stood in the galley doorway with her hands folded and her face carefully neutral, which was the face of someone who understood that whatever she said in this moment would be wrong regardless. You need to apologize to my daughter, Rachel said. Vanessa smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was the smile of a person who found the whole situation mildly entertaining. I don't think I do. You put your hands on a child. I moved an obstacle from my path, Vanessa said, and she turned again. An obstacle, Rachel repeated, and the word landed in the cabin like a slap of its own. Lily pressed against her mother's side, said nothing. She was watching Vanessa the way small children watch things that scared them, not looking away, not looking directly, but tracking, measuring, trying to understand. And then Vanessa stopped again, and she turned all the way around, and she looked at Lily, really looked at her this time, and whatever she saw, whatever calculation she made in that moment, was one of the most terrible things Rachel had ever witnessed in her life. Because it wasn't rage, it wasn't cruelty that came from losing control. It was deliberate. It was chosen. I said, move, little girl, Vanessa said, stepping toward Lily. You are in my way. You have always been in my way. People like you are always in someone's way. Vanessa. The assistant was on his feet now. That's enough. Come on. Sit down, Tyler. Tyler sat down. Rachel stepped in front of Lily. You will not speak to her like that. Move, Vanessa said, and she was talking to Rachel now, not Lily, but the word was the same word. The same flat, emptied-out command she issued to anything she considered beneath her notice. Move before I have you removed from this aircraft. You don't have the authority. Do you know who I am? Vanessa said, and her voice had a new quality in it now, something sharp-edged and practiced, the weapon she reached for when she needed to end something. My father owns more aircraft than your husband has ever been on, so when I tell you to move, and when I tell your little animal to move, don't, Rachel said, one word, low and fierce. I suggest you do it before this gets any worse for you. Rachel was shaking. She could feel it in her hands and in her jaw. Not fear, not exactly, but the effort it was taking to hold herself together, to not become the thing this woman wanted her to become, because that was the trap. She could see it clearly. Any reaction would be used against her. Any word would be twisted. She had been in this position before, not quite like this, not with this particular ugliness, but the shape of it was familiar. The way the room waited to see what the black woman would do, whether she'd give them a reason. She was still holding herself together when it happened. She was still calculating, still reasoning, still trying to find the version of this that didn't blow up, when Vanessa Caldwell reached out with full, deliberate intention and slapped Lily across the face. The sound was like a crack of wood. Lily's head snapped sideways. For one awful, suspended second, she didn't make a sound. Then she crumpled against her mother with a cry so raw and sharp it seemed to fill the entire pressurized cabin from nose to tail. Rachel caught her. Her arms went around Lily before she even knew she was moving. She could feel Lily shaking, feel the wet heat of her tears against her neck, feel the small, thundering heartbeat of a child in shock and pain. "Get out now," Vanessa said, straightening up, voice absolutely level. "You filthy animal." Nobody breathed. For a moment, a long, terrible, stretching moment, the whole world was just the sound of Lily crying. And then, something happened that no one in that cabin was prepared for. Lily lifted her face from her mother's shoulder. Her cheek was red. There were tears streaming down her face. She was holding Captain so tightly, the stuffed rabbit was nearly bent in half. But she looked at Vanessa and she said, in a voice that was both small and impossibly clear, "My dad owns this plane." The silence that followed was a different kind of silence. Vanessa stared. For the first time since she had walked down that aisle, the expression on her face flickered. "What?" "My dad," Lily said again, and she wiped her face with the back of her hand. "Owns this plane. He owns lots of planes." Someone in the front of the cabin made a sound that might have been a breath or might have been a laugh that was immediately suppressed. Vanessa turned to Rachel. "Is your child seriously—" "Her name," Rachel said, and her voice had changed. Not louder, not angrier, but different. With something solid in it now, something grounded. "Is Lily, and she's telling you the truth." Vanessa laughed. It was a short, sharp, dismissive sound. "Oh, that is really something." "You want to play that game right now? On my flight?" "This is not your flight," Rachel said. "This is my husband's aircraft." "Your husband doesn't own—" "His name is Michael Thompson," Rachel said, "and I suggest you think very carefully about whether that name means anything to you before you say another word." The air in the cabin changed. It was subtle, but it was real. The way temperature changed when a cloud passed in front of the sun. Several of the passengers shifted in their seats. Tyler, the assistant, closed his eyes briefly, the way people close their eyes when they understood, too late, that they were in the middle of something they could not get out of. Vanessa Caldwell said nothing for a count of 3. Then, "You're bluffing." "I'm not," Rachel said. "People like you don't—" "If you finish that sentence," Rachel said very quietly, "you will regret it for a very long time." Vanessa stopped. She looked at Rachel. She looked at Lily, who had stopped crying and was watching her with those wide, still, serious eyes. She looked at the other passengers, who were all very carefully not looking at any of them. And then she looked at Tyler, who was studying his shoes with the intense concentration of a man who wanted to be anywhere else on earth. "This is ridiculous," Vanessa said, but her voice, for the first time, had a crack in it, barely perceptible, but there. "Sit down," Rachel said. "Don't move. Don't speak." Something in her tone, or perhaps it was the name Michael Thompson still hanging in the air, made Vanessa do exactly that. Rachel reached into her purse with steady hands and took out her phone. She pressed a contact. It rang once, twice. Then a voice answered, low, unhurried, with the particular quality of a man who had learned that urgency was most effective when it looked like calm. "Hey," Michael said. "How's the flight?" "Michael," Rachel said, "something has happened, and I need you to handle it." There was a brief pause. Anyone who knew Michael Thompson would have recognized what that pause meant. It was not hesitation. It was the exact opposite of hesitation. It was the silence of a man shifting his full attention from everything else in the world to the one thing that required it. "Tell me," he said. And so Rachel told him. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't make it dramatic. She stated the facts in the same order they had occurred. The shove, the words, the slap, the marks still visible on their daughter's face. and she listened to the silence on the other end that grew more and more concentrated with each detail. When she finished, there was a pause. "Put Brooke on the phone," Michael said. Rachel walked a few steps to the galley doorway. "Brooke, my husband would like to speak with you." Brooke took the phone. She listened. Her expression did not change, because she was a professional, but something in her posture changed. A straightening, a settling, a quiet recalibration. She handed the phone back to Rachel and turned toward the cockpit without another word. Vanessa was watching all of this from her seat. "What is she doing?" she said. And there was something new in her voice, something that was trying very hard not to be what it was. "What is she doing?" No one answered her. Over the intercom, in the measured, careful voice of a pilot who had just received very specific instructions from the man whose name was on the registration of this aircraft, came an announcement that changed the air in the cabin entirely. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the inconvenience. We will be making an unscheduled landing. Please ensure your seatbelts are fastened." "What?" Vanessa stood up. No, that is, you cannot turn this plane around for—" "Please take your seat, ma'am," Brooke said, reappearing from the galley, with a serenity that had clearly been tempered by years of dealing with exactly this sort of person. "The pilot's instructions are non-negotiable. I will not sit down. I will not—" "Ma'am," Brooke's voice was gentle and absolute. "Sit down." Vanessa sat down. The plane banked slowly to the left, beginning its arc back toward the east. The city lights shimmered far below. The businessman in the front had stopped pretending not to watch. The woman with the cream hat had put her magazine down entirely, and Lily, pressed against her mother's side, her cheeks still red, Captain clutched to her chest, reached up and took Rachel's hand. "Daddy's coming?" she asked. "Daddy's coming," Rachel said. Lily nodded once with the solid, unshakable confidence of a 6-year-old who had absolute faith in exactly one person's ability to fix the unfixable. "Good," she said. And she leaned back against her mother and closed her eyes. Across the aisle, Vanessa Caldwell sat in her cream blazer with her rhinestone phone case in her lap, staring at the back of the seat in front of her, and said nothing. The plane hummed around her. The altitude dropped in slow, steady increments, and with every foot of descent, the understanding of what had just happened, of what she had done, and to whom she had done it, and what was waiting for her on the ground, settled over her face like something she could not brush away. Rachel did not look at her. She had no need to. She had her daughter in her arms and her husband on the phone, and her eyes fixed straight ahead. And she was thinking with a clarity that only comes after the worst moment has already passed, about what she was going to say when they landed, because there were things that happened in this world that you let slide. There were battles that were not worth the cost, indignities that were better swallowed than fought, moments where the wise choice was to step back and protect yourself and move on. Rachel Thompson had made that calculation more times than she could count, and she had almost never been wrong. But you did not hit a 6-year-old. You did not put your hands on a child. You did not call a baby an animal. And if you did, if you made that choice in front of witnesses, high in the air, then you had better know exactly whose aircraft you were on before you did it. The plane flew east. The city fell away below. And somewhere over the dark spaces between, a man named Michael Thompson ended his call, stood up from a conference room table, straightened his jacket, and told the people around him that he needed his car. They did not ask why. They never needed to. Michael Thompson was not a man who moved quickly unless he had a reason, and when he had a reason, nothing on earth could hold him still. The plane was still descending when Vanessa Caldwell made her first mistake of the landing. She stood up, not to apologize, not to speak to anyone in particular. She stood up because sitting still had become physically unbearable. And because Vanessa Caldwell had spent her entire life dealing with discomfort by moving through it rather than sitting inside it, she gripped the headrest in front of her and looked toward the front of the cabin. And her voice, when it came, had the particular pitch of someone who had decided that attack was still a viable strategy. "I want to speak to the pilot," she said. "Right now." Brooke appeared from the galley with the unhurried efficiency of someone who had anticipated exactly this. "The pilot is not available, ma'am. He works for me. He works for the aircraft owner," Brooke said. And the precision of the correction was so clean and quiet that it landed harder than a shout would have. "Please sit down. I am a Caldwell," Vanessa said. And the name came out of her the way a card got slapped on a table, with the expectation that it would end the conversation. "My father has had people fired for less than this. Do you understand what I'm telling you? One phone call." "Ma'am," Brooke's voice didn't change by a single degree. "Sit down." Vanessa turned. Her eyes swept the cabin, looking for an ally, for a sympathetic face, for anyone who understood her position. The businessman in the window seat looked out at the dark. The woman with the cream hat suddenly found something fascinating about her own hands. Tyler, her assistant, had his forehead pressed against the seat back in front of him, in the posture of a man praying for the earth to open up and swallow him whole. She sat down. Rachel heard all of it from 4 rows back. She kept her eyes forward. One arm stayed around Lily, who had fallen into that strange half-sleep that children sometimes dropped into after sharp shocks, not fully unconscious, but somewhere close, her body's way of protecting itself. Rachel could feel the warmth of Lily's breath against her collarbone and the slow, steadying rhythm of her daughter's heartbeat, and she used both of those things to keep herself anchored. Because the part of her that was not being a mother right now, the part that was just a woman who had watched another woman strike her child, that part wanted to walk 4 rows forward and do something Rachel Thompson was not going to do on a plane or anywhere else. She was better than that. She knew she was better than that. But knowing it and feeling it were 2 entirely separate things. And right now, she was working very hard on the feeling. Her phone buzzed. A text from Michael. "I'm on my way. Don't engage her again. I'm handling it from the ground." She typed back. "She hit our daughter, Michael." Then, "I know." Rachel put the phone face down on her knee. She could hold it together. She had held harder things together for longer. What she didn't know, what none of the passengers in that cabin knew yet, was that Michael Thompson had already been on 3 phone calls in the time since she'd hung up with him. The first was to his head of security. The second was to the airport operations manager at Logan, where the plane was now being rerouted. The third was to a man whose name Rachel had heard exactly twice in their marriage, both times in the context of serious problems being permanently resolved. Michael did not make that third call lightly. He made it now. Lily stirred. She pressed her face against Rachel's shoulder and said, without opening her eyes, "Is she still there?" "Yes," Rachel said, keeping her voice even. "But she's not going to touch you again." "I know," Lily said with a certainty that broke Rachel's heart a little. "Because Dad owns the plane." "Yes." She didn't know that. "No?" Rachel said. She didn't. Lily was quiet for a moment, then, "She should have been nicer anyway, even if Dad didn't own the plane." Rachel pressed a kiss to the top of her daughter's head and said, "You're right. She should have." "Captain's mad at her," Lily added and held up the rabbit. "Captain has excellent judgment," Rachel said. For the first time since the slap, she almost smiled. The almost smile died when Vanessa's voice cut through the cabin again. "I'm calling my father." She had her phone in her hand, the rhinestone case catching the cabin light. "He will have this entire situation sorted out before we touch the ground. Whatever that man's name is, Thompson, whatever, my father will know it within minutes." Nobody responded. "He already does know it," said a quiet voice from across the aisle. It was the businessman in the window seat. He had not spoken once since boarding. He was somewhere in his 60s, compact and gray-haired, with the contained, patient quality of a man who had been in many rooms with many powerful people and had long since stopped being impressed by any of them. He had a glass of water in his hand, and he was looking at Vanessa with an expression of mild, almost academic interest. Vanessa stared at him. "Excuse me?" "Richard Thompson," the man said. "Michael Thompson's father. He and Caldwell Sr. have been in the same investment circles for years. They are not friends." He took a small sip of water. I'd put the phone down. The cabin was absolutely still. Vanessa's hand lowered. "Who are you?" "Nobody important," the man said and looked back out the dark window. Tyler made a sound that was definitely a laugh, disguised as a cough. Vanessa shot him a look that could have stripped paint, and he pressed his fist to his mouth and looked away. Rachel turned her head slowly and looked at the gray-haired man. He did not look back at her, but something in the set of his jaw told her he was aware of exactly what he had done and had made his peace with it before he opened his mouth. She didn't know who he was. She didn't need to. She turned back to face forward. Vanessa said nothing for the remainder of the descent. The wheels touched down with a long, smooth shudder. The engines reversed. The plane slowed, taxied, and came to a stop, not at a terminal gate, but at a private section of the airfield where two vehicles sat waiting, their headlights cutting clean lines in the dark. Rachel recognized the car on the left, black, not new, nothing flashy. Michael had never been about flash, but she knew the shape of it the way you knew anything you had been riding in for years. He was already out of the car before the door of the plane opened. She saw him through the window, tall, jacket on despite the hour, moving fast but not running because Michael Thompson had never needed to run to communicate urgency. He crossed the tarmac with the kind of walk that made people instinctively move out of his path. Behind his car, a second vehicle sat running. 3 men climbed out of it. They were not large men particularly. They did not look like security in the way security looked in movies. They were quiet and organized, and they positioned themselves without being told. And that economy of movement, that practiced silence, was somehow more serious than size would have been. The cabin door opened. Brooks stood aside. Michael Thompson stepped in. He was in his 40s and he had built companies and lost one and built more, and had done all of it without ever once developing the habit of announcing himself when he entered a room, because he had learned early that the most powerful thing a person could do was arrive quietly and let the room figure out for itself what it was dealing with. He looked at his wife first. That was the first thing he did. Found Rachel's eyes, held them for a moment. A check-in that said, "I'm here and I'm angry and I'm in control of the anger and you're safe." Then he looked at Lily. Lily looked back at him and said, "Dad, she hit me." Something moved across Michael Thompson's face. It was brief and it was controlled, and if you had blinked, you would have missed it. But Rachel did not miss it. She'd been watching that face throughout their marriage, and she knew what lived behind the composure. And what she saw in that half second was something that had no name she was willing to say out loud. He crossed the cabin in 4 steps and crouched in front of his daughter. He cupped Lily's face in both hands and turned it gently toward the light, and looked at her cheek and said nothing for a moment. Then he said, very quietly, "Are you okay, baby?" It still hurts a little, Lily said honestly. I know. He pressed his forehead to hers. I'm sorry it took me this long to get here. You came fast, Lily said. Captain said you would. Michael pulled back and looked at Captain. Captain is very smart, he said, and his voice was steady and warm, and gave no indication at all of what was happening in the rest of him. He stood up. He turned around, and for the first time since he'd walked through that door, he looked at Vanessa Caldwell, the woman who had been commanding a private aircraft as though it belonged to her, who had used words on a 6-year-old that belonged nowhere near a child, who had struck a little girl with the flat of her hand and smoothed her blazer afterward. That woman was now sitting in her cream-colored blazer, with her rhinestone phone case face down on her knee, and her assistant beside her, and her father's name on the tip of her tongue. And she was looking at Michael Thompson, and for the first time in this entire ordeal, she was genuinely afraid. Not of the men outside. Not of the pilot or the flight attendant or the gray-haired businessman who had said what he said and gone back to his window. She was afraid of the way Michael was looking at her, because it wasn't rage. It wasn't loud. It didn't perform itself for the cabin. It was the look of a man who had already decided what was going to happen and was simply waiting for the appropriate moment to let her know. Mr. Thompson, she said, and her voice for the first time was not flat. It was careful. I think there may have been a misunderstanding about what... No, Michael said. One word, not raised, not sharp, just closed. Vanessa stopped. I've spoken to Brooke, he said. I've spoken to 2 other passengers. I've seen my daughter's face. He paused. There is no misunderstanding about what happened on this aircraft. Your daughter was in the way, Vanessa said, and even as the words came out, she seemed to know they were wrong, seemed to feel them go wrong in her mouth. But she had committed to the strategy of justification, because it was the only one she had left. My daughter, Michael said, is 6 years old. I understand that, but she's 6 years old, Michael said again with no change in volume and no change in expression. And the repetition was more devastating than any escalation would have been. She was carrying a stuffed animal. She was going to the bathroom. I barely... Don't, Rachel said from behind him, and whatever was in her voice made Vanessa close her mouth. Michael let the silence sit for a moment. Then he took a breath and said, Here is what's going to happen. You're going to stand up. You're going to walk to my wife and my daughter, and you're going to apologize. Not to me, to them. Vanessa stared at him. You can't just... I own this aircraft, Michael said. I own the charter that services it. I own the hangar where it's parked, and I have attorneys whose home numbers I know from memory, which means that what you did to my daughter in the air tonight has about 6 different legal angles I can approach it from. He tilted his head slightly. Or you stand up, you apologize, and we see how this goes from there. Tyler reached over and touched Vanessa's arm very gently. Vanessa. He said it like a warning and a plea at once. Please. She looked at Tyler. She looked at Michael. She looked at Rachel, who was watching her with an expression that gave nothing away and demanded everything. She looked at Lily, who was looking back at her with those wide, dark, steady eyes. Not with hatred, not with triumph, but with the clear-eyed gravity of a child waiting to see if an adult was going to do the right thing. Vanessa Caldwell had been raised with every advantage available to a human being. She had been given wealth and access, and the kind of confidence that came from never once in your life being told no in a way that actually stuck. She had grown up in rooms where her name opened doors, and her father's name cleared entire corridors. She had never, not once, been in a situation she couldn't exit on her own terms. She stood up. Her legs were not entirely steady. She made them work anyway. She moved down the aisle past the businessman who did not look at her, past the woman with the cream hat who did, past Tyler, who had his eyes on the floor. She stopped in front of Rachel and Lily. Up close, the mark on Lily's cheek was still visible. Vanessa looked at it, and the look on her face was complicated in a way that was hard to name. It was not simple guilt, but it was not nothing either. Some part of her was seeing, perhaps for the first time in a very long time, what she had actually done. She stopped, tried again. I owe you an apology. Yes, Rachel said. You do. What I said was another stop. Vanessa looked at Lily. What I said to you was wrong, and what I did was wrong. I'm sorry. Lily looked at her for a long moment. The kind of look a child gives when they are genuinely thinking it over. Not performing consideration, but actually doing it. Then she said, Did you know it was wrong when you did it? The question hit the cabin like a stone dropped into still water. Vanessa opened her mouth, closed it. Something in her face shifted, cracked slightly at one corner, the way a facade cracked when the pressure behind it finally exceeded the structure's capacity to hold. She swallowed. I think I wasn't thinking. That's not really the same as not knowing, Lily said. 6 years old. And she said that without raising her voice, without any particular sharpness, just as an observation. The way a child states a truth that adults have spent decades learning to dress up in softer language. Rachel put her hand on Lily's knee, not to stop her, just to be there. Vanessa looked at Rachel then, really looked at her. And Rachel looked back and said, I want you to remember this. Whatever happens next, whatever your father arranges or doesn't arrange, whatever lawyers say or don't say, I want you to remember what my daughter just said to you, because she is more right than you are going to be comfortable thinking about. Vanessa nodded once. It was small and tight and real. She turned and walked back to her seat and sat down and put her hands in her lap and did not speak again. Michael watched her go. Then he turned back to Rachel. He sat down next to her and took her hand and held it, and she felt the tension in his grip, the thing he had been holding together, and she tightened her fingers around his and let him hold on to her. She apologized. Rachel said quietly, I know. Lily made her see it. Michael looked at their daughter, who had already gone back to adjusting Captain's ears with the focused attention of someone with important work to do. He looked at her for a long moment, and his jaw worked slightly, and he said, barely above a whisper, She's gonna be something. You know that? She already is, Rachel said. Outside, one of the security men knocked once on the open cabin door. Michael looked up. The man gave a small nod. Michael nodded back. Then he looked at Rachel. I need to make one more call, he said, and then I need to talk to you about something. Not here when we get home. The way he said it made Rachel look at him more carefully. What kind of something? The good kind, he said. The kind that should have been said sooner. She studied his face. He gave nothing away, but there was something in his eyes, a fullness, a weight that was warm rather than heavy. She didn't push. She had learned throughout their marriage when to push Michael Thompson and when to wait. And this was a night for waiting. Okay, she said. He squeezed her hand once, then stood and stepped away to make his call. She watched him go and felt the strange, layered exhaustion of a woman who had held herself together under enormous pressure and was only now allowing herself to feel how heavy the holding had been. Little Lily looked up. Mom? Yeah, baby. I'm hungry, Rachel laughed. It was sudden and genuine and a little raw around the edges, and it was exactly what the moment needed. We'll get food as soon as we're off the plane. Can I have waffles? At this hour? Dad said, yes, food is always available, Lily said with absolute authority. Rachel shook her head. Your father made that up. He says it's a rule. It's not a rule. It should be a rule, Lily said, and went back to Captain's ears. Outside, Michael was on the phone, his back to the plane, one hand in his pocket. He was not pacing. He never paced. He stood still the way he always stood, like a man who had decided where he was and had no plans to be moved. His voice didn't carry through the door, but Rachel could see the line of his shoulders, the set of his head, and she could read from across the tarmac that whatever was being said on the other end of that phone, Michael was not the one explaining himself. Tyler slipped past her in the aisle with 2 carry-on bags over one shoulder, and his eyes on the floor. He paused when he reached her row, and he stopped and he looked at Lily and he said, I'm sorry for not doing more earlier. His voice was rough and low and genuine. Rachel looked at him. He was young and tired in a way that had nothing to do with the hour. Why didn't you? She asked, not accusatory, just asking. He looked at his shoes. I've been answering to her family. I kept thinking someone else would. He paused. Nobody ever does. Well, Rachel said quietly, now you know to be the someone. He nodded. He moved toward the exit. He didn't look back. Brooke appeared at Rachel's elbow with a small bag, a juice box, and a wrapped chocolate chip cookie. She held it out without a word, and when Rachel looked at her in quiet surprise, the flight attendant gave the smallest possible shrug and said, It's from the galley stock. She's had a long night. Rachel took it. Thank you. Thank you, Brooke said, and her voice had a weight in it that made Rachel understand she was not just talking about the cookies, for not letting it go. Then she moved away, back to her work, back to the quiet, invisible efficiency of someone who had witnessed everything tonight and would carry all of it home with her. Lily spotted the cookie. Her eyes went wide. Is that for me? It is. And the juice? Also for you. Captain wants some, Lily said. Captain is a rabbit. Captain has very sophisticated tastes, Lily said seriously, and accepted the bag, and within moments had the cookie unwrapped and was eating it with both feet tucked underneath her, quiet and content and 6 years old and fine. Already fine. Already moving forward with the remarkable resilience of children, that instinctive forward motion that adults spent years trying to recover. Rachel watched her and felt something open up in her chest. Not grief, not anger, not the residue of fear, something older and more fundamental, the thing that made a person stand up on a plane and refuse to be moved, the thing she had been given and had carried, and had now passed without fully meaning to, without any ceremony or speech, to this small person eating a cookie. She was still watching when Michael came back through the door. He stood at the top of the aisle and looked at Lily. And Lily looked up from her cookie and said, Dad, Mom said waffles aren't a yes food. Michael looked at Rachel. I may have created a monster, he said. You definitely created a monster, Rachel said. He smiled then. The real one. The full one. The one he kept for the two of them. He came back down the aisle and sat and put his arm around Rachel, and she leaned into him and closed her eyes for a moment, just a moment, and let herself breathe. The tarmac was quiet outside. Vanessa's car had arrived. A town car from a service she must have called while Michael was on the phone. She was gone from the cabin already, had moved through the exit with Tyler behind her, and no fanfare, no final word, just the absence that followed a thing that had played itself all the way out. Rachel didn't watch her go. She had already decided somewhere over the descent that she would not spend another minute watching Vanessa Caldwell. Whatever consequences arrived for that woman, they would arrive without Rachel's energy powering them. Michael would handle what needed handling. The lawyers would do what lawyers did. And somewhere in a quiet room, a woman who had never once been truly accountable for anything in her life was going to have to sit with what she had done to a 6-year-old named Lily, who had looked at her and asked, with no malice and no theater, whether she had known it was wrong when she did it. That was enough. That was, Rachel thought, more than enough. Lily finished the cookie. She folded the wrapper carefully. She had always been oddly tidy, even at 6, a mystery given the state of her bedroom, and put it in the side pocket of her bag. She picked up Captain. She looked at her father. "Are we going home now?" "We're going home," Michael said. "Can we get waffles on the way?" "Yes," Michael said. "Michael," Rachel said. "It's a special occasion," he said. "It is not a we were on a plane that got turned around," he said. "That's a waffle-level event." Lily pumped one small fist and said, "I knew it was a rule." And they stood up, the 3 of them, and they gathered their things, and they walked off that plane and into the cool night air of the tarmac. And Lily walked between her parents, holding both their hands and swinging Captain from her wrist. And she did not look back at the plane once. Neither did Rachel. The waffles were good. That was the first thing Rachel would remember about that night when she looked back on it later. Not the airport, not the cold air on the tarmac, not the weight of Lily's hand in hers as they walked to the car. She would remember sitting in a booth at an all-night diner 3 blocks from their San Francisco house, late at night, watching her daughter methodically drown a waffle in maple syrup, with the focused satisfaction of someone who had fully processed the evening and moved on. Children did that. They absorbed the worst thing, and then they asked for waffles, and they meant it. And there was something both devastating and deeply reassuring about that capacity. Michael sat across from them, coffee in his hand, watching Lily the way he had been watching her since the plane. That careful, continuous check-in that parents did when something had happened to their child, and the instinct to protect was still running hot, even though the danger had passed. "She's fine," Rachel said quietly. "I know," Michael said. "You keep looking at her like she might disappear." "I know," he said again. Lily looked up from her waffle. "Dad, I can hear you." "I know that too," Michael said. "I'm fine," Lily said with the particular emphasis of a 6-year-old who found adult concern mildly inconvenient. "Captain is also fine. We're both fine." "Captain took a hit tonight," Michael said, seriously. Lily considered this. "Captain is brave." "Captain is very brave," Michael agreed. And something behind his eyes finally loosened. Just a fraction. Rachel watched him and waited because he had said on the plane that there was something he needed to tell her. The good kind. The kind that should have been said sooner. And she had been patient about it. And she was running low. He set down his coffee. He looked at her. "I have to tell you something about the Caldwell family." That was not what she had expected. "Okay," she said carefully. "Vanessa's father, Victor Caldwell. He and I have a history." Michael turned his cup in a slow circle on the table. "In the past, before we moved, I was in talks with a group of investors about a fund clean energy infrastructure. It was the right project at the right time. Caldwell was one of the investors in the room." He paused. "He pulled his commitment at the last minute, took 2 other investors with him when he left, killed the deal." Rachel frowned. "You never told me that." "I handled it. The fund restructured, found different backing, eventually succeeded. But Caldwell, the way he pulled out wasn't just a business decision. He told the room on his way out that he didn't like the direction the fund's leadership was taking, that he had concerns about the judgment and the character of the people running it. Michael looked at her steadily. He was looking at me when he said it. The booth was quiet for a moment. Lily had gone back to her waffle, apparently satisfied that the adult conversation was not about her. "He meant your race," Rachel said. "Not a question. He never said that. He was too careful to say that. But yes." Michael picked up his coffee. "That's what he meant." Rachel absorbed this. "So tonight wasn't random," Michael said. "I don't know if Vanessa knew who you were when she boarded that plane. I don't know if it was deliberate or if she's just so far inside her own world that she genuinely doesn't see other people as fully real. But I know who raised her. And I know what that family thinks about people who look like us." The words landed differently than they would have earlier. Before the slap, before the plane turning around, before Lily asking a woman twice her age whether she had known it was wrong when she did it. Now they landed with a weight that felt structural, like a beam being added to something already under enormous pressure. "What are you going to do?" Rachel asked. "I've already done some of it," Michael said. "The rest I'll finish. Tell me." He looked at her. He set down the cup. "The charter company that services my aircraft also services several of Victor Caldwell's private jets. I called the CEO. He and I are old friends. As of tomorrow morning, the Caldwell account is being reviewed for renewal." He said it quietly, without satisfaction. Just fact. "The law firm Vanessa's family uses for their real estate holdings. 2 of the senior partners are in my investment network. They will be made aware of tonight. Whether they act on it is their choice, but they will know." "Michael, I'm not finished," he said, and his voice was still quiet, still level, still completely controlled. And that control was somehow the most serious thing about him. "The woman who hit my daughter on my aircraft in front of my wife and called her an animal is going to understand that there are consequences to what she did, not because I want to destroy her, because if I do nothing, she does it again, to somebody else's child. Somebody who doesn't have the resources we have. Somebody who can't make the plane turn around." Rachel looked at him for a long moment. She thought about what he'd said. She thought about Brooke, the flight attendant who had said thank you for not letting it go. She thought about Tyler, who had spent years watching that woman and waiting for someone else to be the someone. "Okay," she said. "You're not going to tell me to let it go?" "No," Rachel said. "I'm going to tell you to be smart about it. But no, I'm not going to tell you to let it go." He nodded slowly. "There's something else. The thing you said on the plane." "Yes." He glanced at Lily, who was on the final third of her waffle and operating in full tunnel vision mode. He leaned forward slightly and lowered his voice. "I've been offered a position. A real one. Not a directorship, not a board seat. An actual operating role. Building something from the ground up. Clean water infrastructure, Sub-Saharan Africa and Southeast Asia. Full funding, real impact." He paused. "It would mean relocating. Not permanently, but significantly." Rachel stared at him. "I was trying to figure out how to tell you," he said, "because I don't want to take it without you. And I know what it would mean for your work, for Lily's school, for everything we've built here. So I sat on it, which I should not have done. And tonight on the tarmac, watching you walk off that plane with our daughter." He stopped. His jaw tightened. I thought about the kind of life I want her to see us live. Not just the money, not just the security, the kind of choices we make with it. Rachel was quiet. "You're angry," he said. "I'm not angry," she said. "I'm thinking." "You're doing your angry thinking." "Michael, there is no such thing as angry thinking. That's a thing you invented to—" "Mom," Lily said, not looking up from her plate. "You do have an angry thinking face." "I am surrounded," Rachel said, "by people with no loyalty." But she was almost smiling, and Michael saw it. And the last of the tension in his shoulders came down by a degree. She looked at him. "Tell me the full picture. Timeline, location, what it means practically. All of it." "Start tonight," she said. "We'll finish tomorrow." He nodded and he began to talk. And that was where they were, in a booth in an all-night diner talking about the rest of their lives, when Michael's phone rang. He looked at the screen. His expression changed in a way that was hard to read. "It's Victor Caldwell," he said. The name dropped into the middle of the table like something thrown. Rachel straightened. "At this hour?" "At this hour," Michael said. And there was something in his voice, not surprise, but a recognition. The particular recognition of a man whose moves have been anticipated by an adversary who has more information than he should. He looked at Rachel. She gave a small nod. He picked up the phone. "Caldwell," he said. Not a greeting, just an acknowledgement of the name. The voice on the other end was the kind of voice that had spent decades being listened to, measured, deliberate, with a texture like old leather. The voice of a man who called people at midnight, not because he was rattled, but because he had decided that midnight was the appropriate time to call. "Thompson," Victor Caldwell said. "I hear we have a situation." "Your daughter struck mine," Michael said. "Yes. I'd call that a situation. My daughter can be impulsive. She gets it from her mother's side." The dismissiveness in his voice was so practiced, it was almost elegant. "I understand there was a confrontation on your aircraft." "There was an assault on my aircraft," Michael said, "on a 6-year-old. A brief pause. Assault is a strong word. It's the accurate word. Michael, the use of his first name was a move, calculated and deliberate. An attempt to reframe the call as a conversation between men who knew each other, who operated at the same level, who could surely find a reasonable accommodation. I think we both know that taking this further serves neither of us. Vanessa has already tendered an apology. She apologized because she had no other option," Michael said. "That's not the same thing as accountability." "What is it you want?" Caldwell asked. And the question was direct in the way questions were direct when the person asking them had already prepared a number in their head. "I want your daughter to understand what she did," Michael said. "And I want to make sure she doesn't do it to someone else." "That's very noble," Caldwell said. And the word noble had something underneath it. Something that was not quite contempt, but was close enough to recognize. "But let's be realistic. You and I both know that a slap on an airplane does not make the news. These things happen, and they resolve quietly." "They resolve quietly," Michael said, "when nobody has the means to make them louder." There was a pause. It was not a long pause, but it was a different kind of pause than the ones before it. "I see," Caldwell said. "I don't think you do yet," Michael said. "But you will." He ended the call. Rachel looked at him. Her eyes were wide. "Did you just hang up on Victor Caldwell?" "I did," Michael said. "People don't hang up on Victor Caldwell." People with something to lose don't, Michael said, and picked up his coffee. Lily looked between her parents. Was that a bad man? Yes, Michael said. Is he going to be in trouble? Michael looked at Rachel. Rachel looked back at him. And there was a whole conversation in that look. About what trouble meant. About what justice meant. About what you told a 6-year-old about. A world that was not always fair, but was sometimes, on the right night, with the right people in the right place, something approaching just. His daughter is, Michael said, and left it there. Lily nodded with the same solid confidence she'd had on the plane. She picked up her fork. She addressed what remained of her waffle. She said, "Good," in a tone that indicated the matter was settled to her satisfaction. And then she ate the last bites and asked if she could have a hot chocolate. They got home in the early morning hours. Rachel carried Lily up from the car because Lily had fallen asleep in her car seat with Captain tucked under her chin. And she weighed almost nothing and everything at the same time, the way sleeping children always did. And Rachel held her against her chest and walked up the steps and got her into bed without waking her, which was a minor miracle on the best of nights, and felt like an enormous one on this particular night. She stood in the doorway of Lily's room for a moment in the dark, just stood there, listening to her daughter breathe. She was still standing there when Michael came up behind her and put both hands on her shoulders and didn't say anything, just stood with her. And they stayed like that for a while, the two of them in the doorway, listening. Then he said, very quietly, "She asked me something tonight while you were in the bathroom at the diner." Rachel turned her head slightly. "What did she ask?" "She asked me if that woman was going to say sorry to other kids she was mean to." He paused. "I said I didn't know. She thought about it and said, maybe somebody should tell her too." Rachel turned fully to face him. "She's 6. I know. She is 6 years old and she is already thinking about the other kids." "I know," Michael said, and something in his voice was rough at the edges. "That's what I mean about the kind of life I want her to see us live." Rachel stood in the dark hallway of her house and thought about the phone call Michael had made to Victor Caldwell, and about the charter company and the law firm and the connections being quietly activated across the city. And she thought about what she herself would do with this, because she had not yet said out loud what was forming in her mind, the thing that had been building since the moment she'd sat back down after Vanessa's apology and the plane had finished its descent. "I wanted to document it," she said. Michael looked at her. "Everything," she said. "The flight attendant's account, the other passengers, the timeline." What was said word for word. She spoke steadily, choosing each word with care. "Not for a lawsuit, or not only for a lawsuit. I want a record that exists independently of you and your business network. I want something that belongs to Lily, something that says this happened, this is what was said, and this is who stood up." "For what purpose?" he asked, not pushing back, genuinely asking. "Because in the years ahead," Rachel said, "I want Lily to be able to know that the night someone called her an animal in a confined space high in the air, her parents did not quietly settle. That there is a document somewhere that says her name, and says what was done to her and says it was wrong." She met his eyes. Children who grow up knowing their story was taken seriously, they're different. They stand differently. I want that for her. Michael was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I'll have someone reach out to Brooke first thing." "I'll reach out to Brooke myself," Rachel said. "She gave us a cookie. We have a relationship." He almost laughed. It was small and tired and genuine. "Okay." And the gray-haired man, Rachel said. The one who spoke up, I want to know who he is. Henry Walsh, Michael said. He runs a foundation out of Chicago. I've met him at conferences. I didn't know he was on that flight. He knew about your father. He's been in the industry a long time. People like Henry know a lot of things. Michael paused. I'll call him. I think he deserves more than a phone call, honestly. Invite him to dinner, Rachel said. He lives in Chicago. Then we'll go to Chicago, Rachel said simply, as if this settled it. Michael looked at her. When did you become the one making the plans? On the tarmac, she said. Something shifted. I'm going with it. He nodded slowly, and there was something in his expression that was close to reverence. Not the performative kind. The kind that came from watching someone you love discover the full measure of themselves in real time. Rachel, he said. Yeah? I should have told you about the position sooner. Yes, she said. You should have. I was scared, he said. And it came out plainly, without apology or decoration. And that plainness was its own kind of courage. Not of you saying no, scared of you saying yes and giving things up and us getting out there and it not being enough. Me not being enough for what I'm asking you to leave behind. Rachel looked at her husband for a long moment. This man who had turned a plane around and hung up on Victor Caldwell and crouched down in an aircraft aisle to press his forehead to their daughters. This man who was scared of not being enough. Michael, she said. Yeah? You turned a plane around tonight. I own the plane. You turned it around for our daughter, she said. That's all I need to know about whether you're enough. He was quiet. Now go to sleep, she said. You have phone calls to make and I need you functional. He went. She stayed in the doorway one more moment. Lily slept on her back with her arms flung wide, the way she always slept, and Captain was tucked beside her on the pillow, and the mark on her cheek was barely visible in the dark, but Rachel knew it was there. She knew its exact size and the precise sound it had made, and the weight of the silence that had followed it. And she understood that she would carry all three of those things for the rest of her life. But she also understood something else, something that had settled in her over the course of this night, slowly, the way certainty settled, not with a bang, but with an accumulation of small moments until suddenly it was just there, solid, fully formed. She understood that this night was not the worst thing that would ever happen to Lily. The world was going to keep being itself, keep offering up its particular inventory of cruelties and injustices. And Lily was going to encounter them because that was the reality of being who she was in the world she lived in. Rachel could not prevent that. No amount of wealth or security or planes turned around would prevent that. But what she could do, what Michael could do, what Henry Walsh had done by speaking in a quiet voice from a window seat, what Brooke had done with a cookie and 2 words, was make sure that when those moments came, Lily already knew in her bones that she was worth fighting for, that the people around her would stand up, that there was no room, no cabin, no altitude at which she would ever be alone. That was the thing. That was the whole thing. Rachel pulled Lily's door to, leaving it open an inch the way Lily always wanted it, and she walked down the hall toward the sound of Michael moving around in their room, and she thought about Chicago. And she thought about clean water in sub-Saharan Africa and Southeast Asia. And she thought about a document that would someday belong to her daughter. And she thought about a woman sitting somewhere right now in a cream blazer, with the night pressing in around her, thinking about what a 6-year-old had asked her. She thought about all of it, and then she went to bed. But a few hours after the house went quiet, Rachel's phone lit up on the nightstand. She was not fully asleep. She hadn't been fully asleep. and she reached for it without sitting up. A text message from a number she didn't recognize. It said, "Mrs. Thompson, my name is Susan Reynolds. I was seated in row 7 on your flight tonight. I want you to know I have video from the moment she shoved your daughter to the moment she sat down after the apology. I didn't know what to do with it tonight. I think I know now. Please call me when you're ready." Rachel sat up in the dark. She read the message twice, 3 times. Then she set the phone down on her knee and sat very still in the quiet bedroom, while her husband breathed slow and even beside her. And she thought about what a video like that meant, what it could do. Not in Michael's world, not in the world of investment networks and charter company contracts and old money law firms, but in the larger world, the one that did not require a name or a connection, or a plane with your husband's name on the registration. The world where a video of a grown woman hitting a 6-year-old girl and calling her a filthy animal was exactly what it looked like to everyone who saw it. She picked the phone back up. She typed, "Thank you, Susan. I'll call you at 8. She put the phone back on the nightstand. She lay back down. She stared at the ceiling and she thought, Victor Caldwell called because he thought this was going to be handled quietly. He had no idea what was coming. Rachel called Susan Reynolds in the morning. She was already dressed, already on her 2nd cup of coffee, already sitting at the kitchen table with a legal pad in front of her, and lines of notes written in the precise, compressed handwriting she used when her mind was moving faster than her hand could keep up. Michael was upstairs. Lily was still asleep. The house was quiet in the particular way houses were quiet when something large was about to happen inside them. Susan picked up on the 2nd ring. Her voice was warm and slightly hoarse, the voice of someone who had also not slept particularly well. She was in her 50s, she said, a pediatric occupational therapist from Chicago, flying to San Francisco for a conference. She had been in row 7 on the right side, close enough to see everything and far enough back that Vanessa Caldwell had never once looked in her direction. "I've been up since early," Susan said. "I kept going back and forth about whether to send that text. My husband said, 'Do it.' My sister said, 'Stay out of it.' Your husband was right," Rachel said. "I know." A pause. "When she hit that little girl, your daughter, I had my phone in my hand already. I've been filming before that. I could see the way things were escalating and I had a feeling. I didn't know what I was going to do with it. I just felt like somebody needed to be watching." Rachel gripped the pen in her hand. "How much did you get?" "Everything from the shove," Susan said. "The words, the slap, your daughter's face after, the apology, all of it. My phone was down at my side and I had the angle slightly off, but you can hear everything clearly. The voices are very clear." "Susan," Rachel said, "I need to ask you something directly." "Okay, what do you want to do with it?" There was a short pause. "That's why I texted you instead of just posting it," Susan said. "Because it's your daughter. It should be your decision." Rachel sat with that for a moment. She appreciated it more than she could say in the moment, and she filed it away to say properly later. "I need time," she said. "Can you give me that?" "Of course. Don't send it to anyone. Don't post it. Just hold it." "Already decided," Susan said. "It's yours." They exchanged email addresses. Susan sent the video before they hung up. Rachel watched it at the kitchen table with her coffee going cold beside her. It was worse seeing it than it had been living it. That was the thing about video. It removed you from the center of your own experience and made you a witness. And witnesses saw things participants didn't. She watched Vanessa's hand come back. She watched it connect. She watched Lily's head snap sideways, and she made a sound in the quiet kitchen that she hadn't made on the plane. Because on the plane, she had needed to hold it together. And here, alone, she didn't. She watched Lily cry. She watched herself stand up. She heard every word. And then she watched Lily lift her face from her mother's shoulder and say, clearly with the video picking up every syllable, "My dad owns this plane." She watched it twice. Then she closed it, put her phone face down on the table, and pressed her hands flat on the legal pad, and breathed. Michael came downstairs. He looked at her face. He sat down across from her without asking questions. She turned the phone over and pressed play and let him watch. He watched it without moving. Not once. His hands were flat on the table, and his jaw was set, and his eyes were steady. And Rachel had been with this man throughout their marriage, and she knew every version of his composure. And this one, this particular stillness, was the one that came after the worst had already been confirmed. When it ended, he said, "Who is she?" "Susan Reynolds, pediatric occupational therapist from Chicago. She's giving us time before she does anything with it. She doesn't have to hold it on our account," Michael said. "It's hers." "I know," Rachel said, "but she's giving us the choice." He was quiet for a moment. "What do you want to do?" Rachel looked at her notes. "I spoke to my brother last night. He's a journalist." Michael's eyebrows moved. "When did you call Alex?" "He was awake. He's always awake." She looked up. "He knows an editor at a national outlet. Not tabloid. Real journalism. He said if we wanted to tell the story on our terms, with context, with the full picture, the history between you and Victor Caldwell, what that family represents, what it means that this happened to a 6-year-old on a private aircraft, and a grown woman felt completely safe doing it. He can make that introduction today." Michael stared at her. "You've been up. Rachel, I know what I'm doing," she said. Not defensive, just clear. He looked at her for a long moment, this woman across the table from him, who had held herself together high in the air, and called him from a crisis and documented everything, and called her brother and was now sitting at their kitchen table with a legal pad and a plan. He looked at her and he said, very quietly, "Yeah, you do." "The question," Rachel said, "is not whether to act. It's how. Do we use Michael's network, quiet pressure, business consequences, the way that world works? Or do we go wider? Do we let this be a story that belongs to us and to Lily, publicly, with our names on it?" "There's a risk in going public," Michael said. "I know. The narrative can get taken away from you. I know that too. And Lily? Lily is the reason I'm considering it," Rachel said, not in spite of her. She leaned forward. "Michael, that video shows a woman calling a 6-year-old black girl a filthy animal on an aircraft. And then it shows that same little girl looking up through her tears and saying, 'My dad owns this plane.' That's not just our story. That's a story that a lot of people need to see. Not because it's dramatic, because it's real. Because that woman felt safe doing what she did in an enclosed space in front of witnesses. And that tells you something about what she expected the consequences to be." Michael was quiet. "I'm not trying to destroy Vanessa Caldwell," Rachel said. "I don't care enough about Vanessa Caldwell to make her the point. The point is what she felt entitled to do. The point is the system that made her feel that way." The kitchen was very still. Then Michael said, "Let me call Henry Walsh before you call your brother." "My Henry?" "Because Henry's seen more of this than either of us. He's been in these situations. He'll know what going public actually looks like from the inside. Not theoretically, actually. He was already reaching for his phone. Give me time. She gave him the hour. She used it to sit with Lily, who woke up with the elastic resilience of a child whose body had decided the night was over, and it was time for cereal. Lily came downstairs with Captain under one arm, and her hair a magnificent disaster. And she climbed into Rachel's lap without invitation and said, "What are we doing today?" "Dad and I have some things to take care of this morning," Rachel said. "Then whatever you want." "The zoo?" "Maybe the zoo. Captain wants to see the giraffe." "Captain sees a lot of things through you," Rachel said. Lily considered this philosophically. "Captain has limited mobility," she said. Rachel kissed the top of her head. "How does your face feel?" Lily touched her own cheek. "A little itchy. Is that normal?" "Totally normal," Rachel said, and kept her voice steady and filed the words "a little itchy" in the place where she kept things she needed to feel later, when she had the privacy to feel them. "Mom," Lily said. "Yeah? Is that lady going to get in trouble?" Rachel chose her words with care. "I think she's going to have to answer for what she did." "Yes. Good trouble or bad trouble? What do you mean?" "Like, is she going to have to learn something?" Lily said. "Or is she just going to get yelled at?" Rachel looked at her daughter. "Why does that distinction matter to you?" Lily shrugged. The particular shrug of a 6-year-old who had not yet learned to dress up her thinking in adult-sized language. Because if she just gets yelled at, she'll stay the same. But if she has to learn something, maybe she'll be different. Rachel held Lily a little tighter and said, "Both, hopefully." "Okay," Lily said, apparently satisfied, and wriggled down and went to find cereal. Michael came back into the kitchen. His expression had changed. Not dramatically, but the way it changed when he'd gotten information that recalibrated something. "Henry talked," he said. "That's a good sign." He said, "Go public." Michael sat down. Not his exact words, but the substance. He said the quiet pressure route works for business consequences and it's worth doing regardless. But if the goal is what you said this morning, if the goal is accountability that means something, then the story needs to exist in a space where it can't be managed by people with enough money to manage things. Did he say anything about the risk? He said the risk is real. And he named families he'd seen get eaten alive by exactly this kind of story once it left their hands. Michael paused. Then he said that those families regretted going public. But they never regretted less than the families who didn't, because at least they chose it. He met Rachel's eyes. He also said that the video changes everything. That without it, you have a story. With it, you have evidence. And evidence is harder to spin. Rachel nodded. She reached for her phone. She called her brother. Alex was and had been working in journalism and had developed, over the course of those years, the particular professional skepticism that came from watching stories get told badly. He was also, beneath that skepticism, fiercely and completely his sister's brother. And when he had heard her voice, he had sat up immediately and stayed up. And he had already talked to his editor by the time she called him back. "Here's how this works," he said. "You talk to them today. You tell the story yourself in your own words on the record. They will want the video. The video needs to come from Susan directly with her for her authorization. They will talk to her separately. You do not get to control the framing once the story is filed, but you get to be the primary source, which means your version is the one that leads." "What's the timeline?" Rachel asked. "If you talk to them today, they could have something ready to run soon." "That's fast." "That's how this kind of story works," Alex said. "If you wait, someone else finds it first. Susan's video is going to surface eventually. A private jet diverted back to Logan will have made it onto aviation tracking accounts. Someone will put the pieces together. If you're not the one telling it when that happens, you lose the narrative entirely. Rachel looked at Michael. He nodded once. "Set up the call," she said. She spoke to the editor, a woman named Patricia Chow. Steady voice. Sharp questions. The kind of journalist who listened more than she talked. For minutes, she told the story beginning to end. She did not perform it. She did not make it bigger than it was. She used the same steady precision she had used on the phone with Michael high in the air. The same discipline of stating facts in the order they occurred without editorializing. And she found that the facts in that order with that precision did not need embellishment of any kind. Patricia Chow asked about Victor Caldwell. Rachel told her what Michael had told her, the investment meeting, the pulled commitment, the comment about character and judgment. She made clear she was reporting what her husband had told her, not making claims she could independently verify. "We'll need to reach the Caldwells for comment," Patricia said. "I assumed you would," Rachel said. "They'll push back." "They're welcome to," Rachel said. "The video exists regardless of what they say." There was a brief pause. "Mrs. Thompson," Patricia said, "I want to ask you something off the record." "Okay. Why are you doing this? You have the resources to handle this privately. Your husband's already working the business angle. You could take the settlement and the apology and the quiet and move on. A lot of people in your position would." Rachel thought about what Lily had said at the kitchen table, about good trouble versus bad trouble, about learning versus being yelled at. She thought about Tyler the assistant, years of watching and waiting for someone else to be the someone. She thought about Brooke. "Thank you for not letting it go." "Because my daughter," she said, "is going to grow up in a world where this happens, and I can insulate her from some of it, but I cannot insulate her from all of it. And I wouldn't want to, even if I could, because you cannot protect a child by making the world smaller around them. What I can do is make sure that when she's old enough to understand what happened on that plane, she can look up and find a record that says her parents didn't manage it quietly, that says it was wrong out loud, with her name attached to it." She paused. "That's why." Patricia Chow was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "On the record again, thank you, Mrs. Thompson. We'll be in touch." The story ran the next morning. By early, it had shares. By later, Susan Reynolds' video was the top trending item on every major platform. The footage was exactly what Rachel had watched at the kitchen table. The escalation, the shove, the words, the slap, Lily's face, and then those 4 clear words rising out of the aftermath like something unbreakable. "My dad owns this plane." The comment sections were not gentle. By later, the Caldwell family's publicist had issued a statement describing the incident as a regrettable misunderstanding, and noting that Vanessa Caldwell had already personally apologized. The statement used the word misunderstanding. It used the word regrettable. It did not use the word assault. It did not use the words filthy animal. It did not mention that Vanessa Caldwell had struck a 6-year-old. The internet noticed all of these omissions. Victor Caldwell called Michael. Michael let it go to voicemail. He had been in back-to-back calls since early. The charter company CEO, his own legal team, board members who had seen the story and called to express their support in the careful, politically calibrated way that powerful people express support when they wanted to be on the record. As sympathetic without committing to anything specific. Michael thanked them and moved on. The call that mattered came. It was from a number Michael didn't recognize. He almost didn't pick up. He picked up. The woman on the other end identified herself as Congresswoman Rebecca Ellis's chief of staff. Congresswoman Ellis, she said, had seen the story and the video and wanted to speak with the Thompson family at their earliest convenience about the incident and about a broader legislative conversation she had been trying to start about racial bias and private aviation access. Was Mr. or Mrs. Thompson available for a brief call? Michael stood in his home office and held the phone slightly away from his face for a moment, processing the scope of what was happening. The way something that had begun on a plane in the dark was now moving through the world under its own power, collecting weight and direction and consequence as it went. "I'll have my wife call you," he said. "This is her story to tell." He found Rachel in the living room with Lily, both of them on the floor with a large sheet of craft paper and several markers making what appeared to be a portrait of Captain the Rabbit in what Lily described as his important mode. "You have a call to make," he said, and held out his phone with the Chief of Staff's number on the screen. Rachel looked at the number. She looked at Michael. She looked at Lily, who was adding what appeared to be a small crown to Captain's head. "Important mode requires a crown," Lily explained without looking up. "Obviously," Michael said. Rachel took the phone. She stood up. She walked to the window and looked out at the afternoon, at the ordinary brightness of a San Francisco day. And she took a breath the way she had trained herself to take breaths on bad planes and in bad rooms, and in all the difficult in-between spaces where composure was a choice rather than a state. Then she dialed. The Chief of Staff picked up on the first ring, and inside the living room, Lily pressed the tip of a gold marker to Captain's cardboard crown and worked with great concentration. And Michael sat on the floor beside her and watched, and the whole house was bright and quiet and full of the kind of ordinary that felt, on a morning like this, like the most extraordinary thing in the world. But across the city, in a hotel suite with drawn curtains and a legal team stationed in the adjoining room, Vanessa Caldwell sat on the edge of a bed and watched her phone fill up with notifications and felt the ground beneath her, the solid, permanent, unquestionable ground she had stood on, her entire life begin for the first time to shift. Her father had called. She hadn't answered. Tyler had texted once. "I'm sorry I didn't do more sooner. I meant that." She had read it and not replied. The video was everywhere. She had watched it once from the beginning, and she had seen herself the way Lily had seen her, the way everyone was seeing her now. And what she had felt was not the sharp, manageable pain of public embarrassment. It was something older and deeper and harder to name, the specific nausea of recognizing yourself in something you cannot explain away. She had known. That was the thing. In that aisle, in that moment, she had known exactly what she was doing, and she had done it anyway, because she had been certain, utterly, foundationally certain that there was no version of this where she faced a consequence. A 6-year-old had asked her whether she'd known, and she had not answered. And the not answering was its own answer. And now the whole world was watching her not answer. Her phone rang again. Her father. She stared at his name on the screen. She put the phone face down on the bedspread. She sat in the dark room, and she thought about the question, the one Lily had asked, the one that had been sitting inside her since the plane, growing heavier with every hour, refusing to be managed or minimized or handed off to a publicist. Did you know it was wrong when you did it? She had. She had known. And somewhere in San Francisco, a 6-year-old with a stuffed rabbit named Captain was adding a crown to his cardboard portrait, and her parents were on the phone with a congresswoman's office, and the world was moving. And Vanessa Caldwell was sitting very still in the dark, holding for the first time in her life the full weight of who she had chosen to be. Congresswoman Rebecca Ellis had a voice like a decision that had already been made. She was in her 60s, had represented her district, and had spent the better part of years trying to get a single piece of legislation about racial discrimination in private and semi-private transportation to move past the committee stage. It had not moved. Not because the evidence wasn't there, but because the evidence didn't have a face, didn't have a voice, didn't have a video that millions of people had watched by the time she picked up the phone and asked her chief of staff to find a number for Rachel Thompson. "Mrs. Thompson," she said when Rachel answered, "I've been waiting for this conversation. I just didn't know it was going to come from a private jet somewhere over the Midwest." Rachel stood at her window and felt something loosen in her chest. "Congresswoman," she said, "tell me what you need." What Ellis needed, she explained, was a face for the legislation. Not a victim face, not a tragedy face. A human face, a mother, a family. A child with a stuffed rabbit and 4 words that had stopped a plane. She needed something that made the abstract concrete, that made the systemic personal, that made the people sitting in comfortable rooms thinking, this doesn't happen anymore. Look at a video and understand in their bodies, rather than just their minds, that it did happen. That it had happened on an aircraft registered to a man who had built his fortune from nothing. And it had happened to his 6-year-old daughter. And it had happened because the woman who did it had calculated, correctly based on everything her life had taught her, that there would be no consequence. "I want to be clear about something," Rachel said. "I'm not interested in being a symbol. I'm interested in something changing." "So am I," Ellis said. "Symbols don't write legislation. People do." "Then let's talk about the legislation," Rachel said. They talked. David came in, sat across from Rachel, and listened. And she held the phone slightly away and looked at him, and he gave her a small nod that meant, "Yes, keep going. This is right." By the end of the call, they had agreed to travel to Washington, not for a press conference, for a working meeting with Ellis's office and 2 other representatives who had been quietly building the same case from different angles. When she hung up, Rachel sat with the phone in her lap for a moment. Then she said, "I need to tell you something." Michael looked at her. "You're already steps ahead of me." "I've been thinking about the position you were offered," she said. "The water infrastructure project." He straightened. "Michael, I want to go," she said. He stared at her. "Not instead of this," she said, "alongside it, because I've been sitting here thinking about what you said, about what kind of life we want Lily to see us live. And I think it's both. I think it's fighting the thing in front of you and building the thing you believe in at the same time, because that's what we actually have the capacity to do." She met his eyes. "I don't want to shrink ourselves to fit the fight. I want to grow ourselves to be worth having in it." Michael said nothing for a long moment. Then he said, "I've been in love with you throughout our marriage, and you still surprise me." "Good," she said. "Keeps you honest." He laughed. The real one. The full one. From the living room, Lily's voice arrived with authority. "Dad, Captain's portrait needs your opinion." "Coming," he called, and looked at Rachel one more moment, and then he went. The story, in the meantime, was not standing still. 3 things happened in rapid succession that no one, not Rachel, not Michael, not Alex the brother, not Patricia Chow at the outlet, had entirely predicted. The first was that Vanessa Caldwell's former college roommate gave an interview, not to a tabloid, to a mid-size independent outlet with a serious reputation, and she spoke for the record and by name. And what she described was not a monster. What she described was a pattern, a way of moving through the world that had been reinforced at every turn. A woman who had been told from birth that the rules were different for her, who had been extracted from consequences so many times by her father's money and her family's name that the very concept of consequence had become theoretical. She didn't say this to excuse it. She said it because she had been thinking about it, and she believed that understanding how a person became capable of something was not the same as forgiving them for it, and she thought the distinction mattered. The internet divided sharply on this interview. Half found it humanizing to the point of discomfort. Half found it the most important thing that had been said about the situation. Both halves argued with each other at considerable volume. Lily, who was not on the internet and did not know about the interview, was at the zoo with her grandmother, Michael's mother, who had driven in from Oakland the moment she saw the story, and who had spent the first hour in the house holding Lily and saying very little, and then rallied completely and proposed the zoo with the decisive energy of a woman who had raised sons and understood that children needed movement more than they needed processing. Lily saw giraffes fed a lorikeet and reported back by text that Captain had been very well behaved and had not tried to feed the animals, which showed, in her words, excellent self-control. The second thing that happened was Victor Caldwell held a press conference. It was brief. He stood at a podium in a suit that cost more than most people's monthly rent, and he read from a prepared statement, and he used the words regrettable and unfortunate and deeply concerned, and he did not once look directly at the camera. He said his daughter was receiving counseling and reflecting seriously on her behavior. He said the Caldwell family had great respect for the Thompson family and wished them well. He said he hoped this situation could serve as a moment of growth and reflection for everyone involved. He did not take questions. He walked away from the podium. His statement was analyzed sentence by sentence in pieces of written content. Most of them focused on the same word, everyone. The hope that this could serve as a moment of growth and reflection for everyone involved. Everyone, as if there were multiple parties here who needed to do some growing. The internet did not let this go. Rachel watched minutes of the press conference and then turned it off. She called Alex. "He said everyone," she said. "I know," Alex said. "He made it mutual, I know. Does Patricia know?" "Patricia's already writing a follow-up," Alex said. "She's going to focus on the legislative angle. She wants a quote from you about Ellis." Rachel thought for a moment. "Tell her this," she said. "Tell her we are not interested in relitigating what happened. We are interested in making sure it cannot happen again to anyone on any aircraft with any child. That is the work. That is where our energy is going." "That's a good quote," Alex said. "It's not a quote," Rachel said. "It's true." The third thing that happened was the one nobody saw coming. Tyler, Vanessa's assistant, called Michael's office number. He had gotten it from the charter company. He said he wasn't sure if this was appropriate, and he understood if Michael hung up. He said he had something to say, and he needed to say it to someone in the Thompson family directly. Michael didn't hang up. "Say it," he said. "I've been with the Caldwell family," Tyler said. "I saw things that I should have reported and didn't. Not as bad as the plane, but the direction of it, the pattern of it." His voice was steady but effortful, the voice of a man who had prepared what he was going to say and was now discovering that prepared words felt different when you were actually saying them. "I kept telling myself it wasn't my place, that I didn't have enough proof, that it would cost me too much." He stopped. "I want to give a formal statement to whoever is appropriate. I have documentation of separate incidents involving Vanessa Caldwell that I kept records of because I was afraid of what might happen if I didn't, but never did anything with." Michael was quiet for a moment. "How old are you, Tyler?" The question seemed to catch him off guard. "I'm in my 30s. And you kept documentation of incidents because something in you knew they needed to be documented." "Yes, that's something in you," Michael said. was the person you're going to be for the rest of your career. It just needed a night like this to get all the way out. He paused. I'm going to give you the name of our attorney. You call her, you give her the statement, you let her decide how it fits into the larger picture. Whatever it costs you professionally, I will personally make sure it doesn't cost you more than you can afford. There was a silence on the line that was full and complicated. Why would you do that for me? Tyler said. I didn't do enough on the plane. You told my wife to be the someone, Michael said. She told me you said that. That counts for something. And you're being the someone now. He paused. That's all any of us can do, Tyler. Be the someone when we actually get there. Tyler called the attorney that evening. His statement, which covered a pattern of behavior, would become part of a larger file that Patricia Chow's outlet would reference in a follow-up piece later. A piece that did not name Tyler as a source, but that confirmed the incidents he had documented were consistent with a broader pattern that had apparently been known and quietly managed within the Caldwell family's circle for years. The file would also make its way to Congresswoman Ellis's office, where it would be added to a growing body of documentation supporting a bill that had been sitting in committee and was now, suddenly, receiving a level of attention that its sponsors had stopped expecting. Lily came home from the zoo with seeds still in her hair and an enormous amount to say about giraffes. She ate dinner with full conversational authority and went to bed without significant resistance, which was unusual enough that Rachel stood in her doorway afterward and thought about it. She's integrating it, Michael said, coming up behind her. Kids do that. They work things out in the body. The zoo was good. Your mother is a genius, Rachel said. Don't tell her that, Michael said. She'll never let us forget it. They stood together in the doorway a moment. Lily was already deeply asleep. Captain in his usual place, the bedroom quiet and ordinary and whole. I talked to the people today, Michael said. Told them we're interested. Told them we need time to sort out the logistics. Time, Rachel said. Lily's school, your consulting schedule, the Washington trip. He counted on his fingers. The follow-up with Ellis, your brother's publication timeline, the attorney working Tyler's statement. It's enough, Rachel said. He looked at her. You know what I keep thinking about? Tell me. I keep thinking about the first meeting I had with Victor Caldwell, he said. Just the two of us over lunch. He was courteous, professional, and at the end of the lunch, when we were leaving, he said something that I put aside because I couldn't prove what he meant by it. He paused. He said, You've built something impressive for someone in your position. And I smiled and shook his hand. And I walked to my car. And I sat there thinking about those 4 words. For someone in your position. Rachel was still. I've thought about that lunch, Michael said. Every time I built something new, every time I closed something, every time I got on one of my aircraft and went somewhere, some part of me was answering those 4 words. He was quiet for a moment. On the tarmac, watching you walk down those steps with Lily, something finished. Something that had been running just stopped running. Because she apologized. Because my daughter looked at the woman who hit her and asked whether she'd known it was wrong, Michael said. Because that question is going to follow Vanessa Caldwell longer than any business consequence I can arrange. Because it came from a 6-year-old who learned it from her mother. He looked at Rachel. I don't need to answer Victor Caldwell's 4 words anymore. I don't need the plane to do it. I don't need the network to do it. It's done. Rachel looked at him for a long moment. She thought about the investment meeting and the pulled commitment and the comment about character and judgment delivered to a room while looking at her husband. She thought about a man who had built things under that weight and had never once told her how heavy it was. You should have told me about the lunch, she said. Yes, he said. I should have told you a lot of things sooner. Starting now, she said. All of it. Whatever you're carrying. Starting now. He nodded, not as in agreement, as a promise. They flew to Washington, not on Michael's aircraft. That had felt, by mutual unspoken agreement, like the wrong energy for this particular trip. They flew commercial, the three of them, in the middle of the plane, and Lily had the window seat, and Captain had the middle seat, and Rachel and Michael shared the aisle and a bag of pretzels, and nobody looked at them sideways, and nobody said anything that needed answering. And it was, in every way, utterly unremarkable, which was exactly what it should have been. Congresswoman Rebecca Ellis met them in person. She was tall, direct, with the kind of warmth that came from genuine, rather than performed interest. And when she crouched down to say hello to Lily, she did not do the thing that some adults did, the high-pitched voice, the exaggerated delight. She just looked at Lily level and said, "I've heard a lot about you." "Good things?" Lily asked. "The best things," Ellis said. Lily assessed her with those wide, serious eyes. "Okay," she said, apparently satisfied. The working meeting lasted hours. Rachel spoke for most of the first stretch, laying out the timeline with the same precise discipline she had used on the phone with Patricia Chow. And then she stepped back and let Michael and Ellis and the two other representatives do the work of translating her experience into the language of policy, which was its own kind of translation, and required a patience she was still developing. But when they got to the question of what the legislation actually needed to say, what the standard of accountability was, who it applied to, how it would be enforced, it was Rachel who said, quietly but with absolute clarity, "The standard is simple. Every person in an enclosed transportation space, regardless of the ownership structure of that space, is entitled to the same protection under the law. No private ownership negates that protection. No family name, no account balance, no prior relationship between the owner and the operator." She paused. "The standard is you don't get to hit a child and call it a misunderstanding because you can afford a better lawyer than her parents." The room was quiet for a moment. Then Ellis said, "That's the language." "That's the principle," Rachel said. "Your lawyers can find the language." "I want it in the preamble," Ellis said. "Not the legal body, the preamble, the statement of intent." "Then use it," Rachel said. On the flight home, Lily fell asleep before they reached cruising altitude, and Michael reached across and took Rachel's hand in the dark of the cabin, and she turned her palm up and held his, and neither of them said anything for a while. Then Lily stirred in her sleep and tightened her grip on Captain, and Rachel watched her daughter's sleeping face, the cheek that was fully healed now, smooth and unmarked, carrying no visible trace of what had happened. And she felt the full weight of the time that had just passed move through her in a single, long wave. The video was still everywhere. It would be for a while. Eventually, it would be replaced by something else, the way everything was replaced by something else, and the news cycle would move, and Vanessa Caldwell would stop trending, and Victor Caldwell's press conference would slide down the search results, and the story would become a reference point rather than a current event. That was how it worked. Rachel had no illusions about that. But the legislation was real. It was moving. Ellis had told them that morning that more co-sponsors had signed on since the story broke, that a committee chair, who had previously been unresponsive, had called her office, that the combination of the video and the documentation from Tyler and the Caldwell press conference's spectacular misfire had created a window that Ellis had been waiting to climb through. Windows closed. Ellis knew that better than anyone. She intended to be through this one before it did. And Tyler, the assistant, the one who had sat with his eyes on his shoes and his mouth closed, and then looked at Rachel in the aisle and said, "I'm sorry I didn't do more." Tyler had been contacted by other former Caldwell employees since his statement. Both had their own documentation. Both had been waiting for someone else to go first. He had called Rachel to tell her this. He had sounded different on the phone than he had sounded on the plane. Quieter, but with something solid under the quiet. The sound of a man who had discovered that being the someone, once you actually did it, made you more yourself rather than less. "Thank you," he had said at the end of the call. "You did the hard part," Rachel had told him. "The first step is always the hard part." On the plane home, somewhere over the Midwest, Lily woke up and looked out the window at the dark and said, "Mom, are we almost home?" "Soon," Rachel said. Lily looked out a moment longer. Then she said, "Mom, I want to be a lawyer." Rachel looked at her. "Since when?" "Since the Washington trip," Lily said. "The congresswoman's job is good, but I want to be the one who makes the rules the lawyers use." "That's a judge," Michael said without opening his eyes. "Even better," Lily said with the complete composure of a person who had just upgraded their life plan and found it satisfactory. She tucked Captain more firmly under her arm and looked back out the window. "Captain agrees," she added. "Captain agrees with everything you say," Rachel said. "Captain has wisdom," Lily said simply. Michael opened one eye. "She's going to be a judge, isn't she? She's going to be whatever she decides to be," Rachel said. "And the world is going to have to make room for it." He closed his eye again. He was smiling. Rachel turned back to the window. Below them, the country spread out in darkness broken by the scattered lights of cities. All those lives and rooms and kitchens and bedrooms. All those children asleep in all those houses. And somewhere among them a woman named Vanessa Caldwell, who had stopped answering her father's calls, who had reportedly checked herself into a facility that specialized in, depending on which outlet you read, either executive burnout or something more specific and more honest. And somewhere in Chicago, Henry Walsh was having dinner with his wife and had told her this story. And she had said what his wife always said when he told her this kind of story. "I'm glad someone finally did something." And he had said what he always said back. "Someone always finally does." And she had said it just takes too long. And he had said, "Yes, it does." And in a hospital in Chicago where she worked, Susan Reynolds was in the middle of a session with a child who was learning to hold a pencil. And she was patient and precise and warm. And she had a small notification on her phone that she would read on her break that said the legislation had moved out of committee, and she would put her phone back in her pocket and return to her work and feel quietly and without ceremony that she had done the right thing. Rachel did not know about any of these moments yet. She would learn about some of them later, and some of them she would never know about, because that was how the consequences of a single night spread through the world. Not in a clean line, not in a story with a clear ending, but in circles, outward, touching things you never intended and couldn't predict, and wouldn't always see. What she knew, sitting on a plane going home with her husband's hand in hers, and her daughter asleep against her shoulder, and Captain tucked between them, was this. A woman had hit her child and called her an animal and expected the world to hold still. The world had not held still. Her daughter had looked up through her tears and said 4 words. And those 4 words had turned the plane around. And the plane turning around had turned something else around too, something larger and less visible, but no less real. something that had been sitting in the wrong direction for a long time and needed exactly this particular night and this particular child and this particular mother who refused to let it go quiet. Lily Thompson would not remember all of it. She was 6. The specifics would soften with time the way all early memories softened. And what would remain would not be the details, but the feeling. The bone-deep understanding absorbed before she had the language to articulate it. That when someone came for her, her parents came back harder. That there was no room and no altitude where she was alone. That she was worth turning planes around for. She would carry that understanding into every room she ever walked into. She would carry it into courtrooms and boardrooms and the difficult conversations and the moments of choice that came for everyone eventually. The moments where you decided who you were going to be when it cost you something. And she would carry Captain with her in some form through all of it. Because some things were just true. And one of them was this. Every child deserved to know they were worth fighting for. And every parent who understood that, who acted on it, who refused the quiet settlement and the managed silence, and the powerful man's midnight phone call asking for discretion. Every parent like that was building something in their child that no one could slap away. Rachel Thompson had built it. Michael Thompson had crossed a tarmac for it. A gray-haired man named Henry had spoken for it from a window seat. A flight attendant named Brooke had handed a cookie across an aisle for it. A woman named Susan had kept her phone in her hand because something in her knew it needed to be witnessed. One night, one plane, one little girl who asked the right question at exactly the right moment. And nothing, not a family name, not a rhinestone phone case, not years of being told the rules were different for people like you, was ever going to be enough to put that back in the dark. The plane flew west. The lights of San Francisco appeared below, spreading out like something that had been waiting. And Lily slept on, dreaming whatever 6-year-olds dream with Captain in her arms, and both her parents beside her, and the whole world open and difficult, and worth every bit of the fight waiting for her on the other side of the landing. In the end, what stayed with us long after the plane touched down wasn't the shock of that slap, or the dramatic turnaround high above the clouds. It was the quiet, unbreakable truth Lily showed us all that night. Even at 6 years old, a child can teach the world what real courage and dignity look like. The most powerful lesson we can carry from this story is that you never stay silent when someone tries to diminish a child. Any child. Whether it's your own or someone else's, the moment cruelty shows its face, especially toward the innocent and defenseless, we each have a choice. Look away and protect our own comfort, or stand up and protect what's right. Rachel and Michael didn't just defend their daughter. They showed her, through their actions, that she is worth turning planes around for, worth fighting for, worth every ounce of courage it takes to speak truth to power. That single decision planted something deep inside Lily that no one can ever slap away. The bone-deep knowledge that she matters, that her voice has power, and that love will always show up when it counts. It's a reminder for every parent, every witness, and every human being watching. The world becomes kinder, braver, and more just only when we refuse to let small acts of hatred pass quietly into the night. Never underestimate the lasting impact of choosing dignity over silence. If this story touched something deep inside you, please take a moment right now to drop a comment below and tell us, what would you have done in Rachel's place? And which city are you watching from today? Your stories matter too. If you believe in standing up for what's right, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss the moments that remind us who we truly are. We're building a community that refuses to stay quiet. Join us.